have some quiet time at home so I could start crafting my Bible study notes and my musings into a sermon, but I kept getting interrupted by email, by phone calls, by my daughter who needed a ride. And don't get me wrong, those interruptions were mostly welcome. And later I realized that they were actually kind of a relief to me because, truth be told, I was wrestling against the message that I was being called to preach. That is to say, I was wrestling with God, and I think we all know how well that works out, right? So, frustrated with my lack of progress on the sermon, I decided to go for a jog through the neighborhood just before sunset. And it turned out that that was a good thing to do because there's something about being outside in the beauty of God's creation that helps me to be more in touch with myself and with others and with God. So almost as soon as I got outside in the crisp fall air, I could feel the sweet sadness of human existence that was soaking into my bones, and I could also just feel the ache inside me as I looked at the beauty of the world around me. And a short time later, then I looked up at these 3 flaming red treetops that were silhouetted against the bright blue heavens, and the message came to me. You're running away, Michelle. You're running away from sharing the story of your great wrestling match. I want you to share that story because my people need to know that you, the stranger, sent to be their shepherd in this time and place, understand something of what they're going through in their lives. And I sighed and said silently, "You got me, Lord. You got me. As always, you're right. I don't want to share that story." And I kind of felt you nudging me, but I told myself that it would be really self-centered of me to tell that story. But now I see that the real reason that I didn't want to tell the story of my great wrestling match is that it's still quite painful. And every time I tell it, I end up limping away. Kind of like Jacob at the Jabbok. And yet I also know, Lord, that it's true that your power is made perfect in weakness. And that when we, your people, dare to be vulnerable with each other, then it opens a space for all of us to grow in love for you and for each other. Dear friends in Christ, my great wrestling match with God and mortals began on January 2nd, 2004. I was home that afternoon enjoying a bit of quiet time after a hectic Advent and Christmas season when all of a sudden the stillness was broken by the sound of the phone ringing. Somewhat reluctantly, I picked up the phone and I heard a male voice say, "Is this Michelle?" "Yes," I replied as my radar immediately went up. "We've never met," the male voice continued, "but my name is Bob, and I'm your Aunt Mavis's stepson." Bob then went on to tell me that my aunt, whom I hadn't seen in several years, clearly had Alzheimer's and would soon need to be in a care facility. Bob said his family would be willing to place her somewhere near them, but he was calling to give us the opportunity to move her closer to us, her blood relatives. And so not long after that fateful phone call, my then 80-year-old mom and I flew out to Norfolk, Virginia to bring her sister back to Portland. Of course, it wasn't as simple as we had planned. My aunt ended up having a psychotic episode in the Minneapolis airport. She began attacking us, stomping and pinching and hitting and biting and trying to get away. And to make a long story short, she ended up being hospitalized in a psych unit for 4 days while the doctors got her medication sorted out. Meanwhile, our luggage had got out to Portland. So Mom and I had only the clothes on our backs. But thankfully, at least that problem was solved by going to the Mall of the Americas the next day. Good thing that God gives us a sense of humor, right? And this was just the beginning of a wrestling match that would last for the next 5 years. It's a good thing I didn't know that at the time. I think it's often a good thing that we humans can't see into the future, right? anyway, during all this time, that 5 years, I sometimes wrestled alone and sometimes had some help in wrestling with a lot of different things. I wrestled with finding a place for Aunt Mavis to live, with other family members who wanted to control things, that is, to do things their way. I wrestled with arranging for my aunt's possessions to be transported from Texas, with navigating the legal channels of guardianship, with financial records that were in disarray, with finding the right doctors for my aunt, with relaying information to all the relatives. And I also wrestled with my aunt herself, who thought that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself, thank you very much, and who was paranoid that we were stealing from her. And of course, at the same time, I was also wrestling with the demands of taking care of a household, including my husband and 3 young kids who were 11, 8, and 6 at the time. And it was Lent. And so I was wrestling with what this Lenten journey meant for me and for the people with whom I was serving at King of Kings Lutheran Church in Manicke. And during this time, my family and I often felt lost and frustrated. Much of the time, we were stumbling around, just trying to guess at what we should do next. I prayed constantly. God, I don't know what to do. Please help me figure out what to do. Please help us find a way forward through this mess. I suspect that many of you know that prayer as well. At any rate, it was not a pretty process. It took a long time, and it took its toll on our energy. In that sense, it was a lot like wrestling. My family and I were wrestling with both humans and with God. We were wrestling in the darkness with a terrible disease, with lack of information, with no sense of direction, and sometimes with a feeling of abandonment. Yet there was nothing to do except keep wrestling until daybreak. Over and over we stumbled in the darkness, and yet we persevered and kept trying to take another step, because that's what families do, right? I mean, when you love someone, you have to keep trying. So finally, after wrestling for a long time, we did begin to make some headway, though we still had the occasional fall, and sometimes ended up going backwards. And yet somehow, in the midst of all this difficulty, we, like Jacob at the Jabbok, received blessing. We were blessed to have our God, to have each other, and to have our faith community to hold on to. We were blessed to meet some wonderful people whom God put in our lives to help us navigate the often difficult pathway. And we were blessed to catch glimpses of hope and light that helped to sustain us and keep us moving forward. We ended up moving Aunt Mavis 3 times as her health declined. She passed away on May 14, 2007. Yet our wrestling match wasn't over. Not by any means, because during that same time period that her health was declining, my mom's other sister began declining physically and mentally, and thus began a new round in the wrestling match. And soon I had to start proceedings to get guardianship and conservatorship for Aunt Enid. Well, at least I know how to do this now, I thought. But the joke was on me, though, because I soon learned that a well-intentioned young ombudsman who had never met me had convinced my aunt that she should protest the guardianship. And this meant that I had to face my 88-year-old aunt in court. And my poor husband had to drive her there. So it was really strange. And the poor dear didn't even know why she was there. She kept asking the judge, "What did I do? I don't know what I did. Why am I here?"